My name is Reese Carrington. I'm 27 years old, and this is the night everything changed. We were sitting in the living room of our suburban house just outside Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My adoptive mother, Valerie, looked me dead in the eye and said the words, "I'll never forget. You are not our blood. If you want to keep living in this house, you must pay $3,000 a month. If you don't want to pay, you can leave." The room went silent. My adoptive father, Gregory, just stared at the floor. Cassidy smirked from the couch. Even Aunt Marlene, who happened to be visiting, let out a little snort like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up, walked to my room, packed one suitcase, and left the house before the clock hit 10. 1 month later, I came back just to grab the last box I'd forgotten. The house was empty. I opened the safe in Gregory's office looking for my old passport and found something else, a sealed envelope from 1998, a Polaroid of a newborn baby, and bank records showing a single-wire transfer of $1,200,000 from a trust in Boston. I took photos of everything closed the safe and walked out. Exactly 2 months after I left that night, the truth came out, and the people who threw me away for $3,000 a month lost everything they had. If a story like this makes your blood boil, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you're not going to believe what happened next. That night wasn't the first time I felt like a stranger under that roof. Growing up in the quiet streets outside Baton Rouge, the difference between me and my younger sister Cassidy Carrington, who is 25, was impossible to ignore. From the moment she came home from the hospital, everything revolved around her. New clothes, private tutors, dance lessons, the latest phone the day it came out. Cassidy never had to ask twice. I, on the other hand, got hand-me-down second-hand laptops and constant reminders that money didn't grow on trees, especially not for me. Valerie Carrington, the woman I had always called Mom until I was about 18, would look at Cassidy's report card and beam like she'd won the lottery. When I brought home the exact same grades, she'd glance at it, nod once and say, "That's nice. Reese, now, go help with dinner." Gregory Carrington, my adoptive father, rarely spoke up. He'd just bury himself deeper in the newspaper or disappear into his garage, pretending he didn't hear the digs. Then there was Aunt Marlene, Valerie's older sister, who seemed to make it her life mission to point out how I never quite fit. Every holiday, every birthday party, she'd pull me aside and whisper things like, "You should be grateful they kept you," or, "Look at Cassidy. Now that's what their real daughter looks like." I was 12 the first time she said it loud enough for other relatives to hear. Nobody corrected her. They just laughed awkwardly and changed the subject. By high school, the gap only grew wider. Cassidy got a brand new Mustang for her 16th birthday. I was told I could use the old Camry once I paid for my own insurance, which I did by working nights at a coffee shop while still keeping a 4.0 GPA. When I was accepted to LSU with a partial scholarship, Valerie shrugged and said, "College was expensive, and maybe I should consider community college first." 2 years later, Cassidy decided on an out-of-state private school that cost $70,000 a year. The check was written the same week. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the way they looked at me like I was a long-term house guest who had overstayed her welcome. Family photos on the wall always had Cassidy front and center, smiling wide, while I stood slightly off to the side, half-cropped out of the frame. At dinner, conversations flowed around me rather than to me. I learned early to keep my head down, work hard, and never expect the same warmth they poured on Cassidy without a second thought. Marlene loved to remind everyone that I should feel lucky. "Some kids end up in the system," she'd say, sipping her wine, "but Valerie and Gregory gave you a roof, food, a good school district. Most people would kill for that." The truth was, I did feel grateful for years. I told myself the coldness was just their personality, that maybe I was too sensitive. I tried harder, achieved more, hoping one day they'd see me the way they saw Cassidy. It never happened. Looking back, the signs were screaming at me long before that final night in the living room. The locked drawer in Gregory's office I was never allowed to touch, the way Valerie's face tightened whenever someone asked if I looked like either of them, the hushed phone calls that stopped the second I walked into the room. Little moments I brushed off because I didn't want to believe the people who raised me could feel that way about me. I graduated college debt-free, only because I worked 2 jobs and lived on ramen. Cassidy dropped out after 1 semester and came home with a new designer wardrobe, no questions asked. I landed a solid remote contract as a senior graphic designer and started saving every penny. They noticed the direct deposits growing in my account and suddenly decided a 27-year-old still living at home needed to contribute $3,000 a month. The night Valerie laid down her ultimatum, something inside me finally snapped into place. All those years of swallowing the hurt, telling myself I was overreacting, ended in that single moment. I didn't need to hear another word. I already knew exactly where I stood. That Saturday morning, the house was completely empty for the first time in weeks. I still had the spare key, so I let myself in around 9, planning to grab the last box of winter clothes I'd left in the attic and be gone in 10 minutes. The silence felt strange after everything that had happened. I walked past the living room where Valerie had delivered her ultimatum and headed straight to Gregory's small home office at the back of the house. The safe was built into the bottom drawer of his desk. I'd seen him open it 100 times growing up, always when he thought no one was watching. The combination hadn't changed since I was 14, Cassidy's birthday. I turned the dial, heard the click, and pulled the heavy door open. Inside were the usual things: passports, the deed to the house, some old jewelry Valerie never wore. Then I noticed a thick manila envelope pushed to the very back, yellowed with age and sealed with red wax that had cracked years ago. My name was written on the front in faded ink: Reese, do not open until told. I broke the seal. The first document was a private adoption agreement dated April 1998, signed by both Valerie and Gregory Carrington and countersigned by a Boston law firm. Below their signatures was another Jonathan Hawthorne, my biological father. Next came a single bank transfer confirmation for $1,200,000 from the Hawthorne Family Trust into an account owned by Valerie and Gregory, executed 3 days after my birth. There was also a Polaroid of a newborn baby wrapped in a hospital blanket, eyes barely open. On the white border, someone had written in blue ink, "Baby Girl Hawthorne, 0415 to 1998, JH." I sat on the floor and kept pulling papers out. A non-disclosure agreement that ran for 15 pages, a letter from the law firm instructing Valerie and Gregory never to reveal the identity of the biological parent, and a separate clause that released Jonathan Hawthorne from any future financial or emotional obligation. Everything was designed to erase any trace that I had ever belonged to anyone else. My hands were shaking so hard the pages rattled. I laid them out on the carpet in order: adoption contract, money transfer, photo, NDA. I took my phone and photographed every single page, zooming in on the signatures and dates until the images were crystal clear. When I reached the last document, a short handwritten note on heavy cream stationery, my breath caught in my throat. It was from Jonathan Hawthorne himself, dated the day I was born. "If you're reading this, it means something went wrong and you found out early. I wanted to keep you more than anything in the world, but I was 24, and my family threatened to cut me off completely if I fought them. I'm sorry. One day I'll make this right. JH." There was no address, no phone number, just those 3 sentences. I stared at the photograph again. The baby had the same faint birthmark on the left wrist that I still have. The eyes were the same shade of green I see in the mirror every morning. For 27 years, I had been living 1,500 miles away from a father who had paid an insane amount of money just to keep me safe and hidden. I folded everything exactly as I found it, slid the envelope back into the safe, and spun the dial until it locked. Then I sat there on the office floor for a long time, listening to the house creak around me. Nothing looked the same anymore. The framed family pictures in the hallway, the height marks on the kitchen door frame, the trophies in the cabinet that were all Cassidy's, every memory felt counterfeit. I finally stood up, grabbed the box from the attic, and walked out without touching anything else. The second I got back to my tiny studio apartment downtown, I emailed the clearest photos to a private investigation firm in New Orleans I'd found online the week before. I included the name Jonathan Hawthorne and the trust details, then added one line: "I think this man is my biological father. I need to know for sure." Less than 4 hours later, I received a reply: "We're on it. Preliminary match already looks strong. We'll update in 48 hours." I closed my laptop, looked out the window at the Mississippi River rolling by, and realized the life I thought I knew had just ended for good. 9 days later, my phone lit up with a New York number I didn't recognize. The investigator told me Jonathan Hawthorne wanted to meet in person and had already booked a private suite at a small hotel in Midtown Manhattan under a corporate name. He added that Jonathan had seen the photographs I sent and agreed to a paternity test the same day. I booked the earliest flight out of Baton Rouge and landed at LaGuardia before noon 2 days after that call. A black SUV picked me up at arrivals and drove straight to the hotel. No check-in desk, no lobby, just a private elevator that opened directly into the top-floor suite. When the doors slid apart, Jonathan was standing by the window overlooking Central Park, hands clasped behind his back. He turned the second he heard me step inside, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. He looked exactly like an older version of the eyes I see in the mirror every morning. Same sharp jawline, same green shade that changes with the light. He was taller than I expected, and dressed in a simple navy suit that probably cost more than my car. His longtime assistant Jenna quietly closed the elevator doors behind me and stayed near the entrance. A doctor in a white coat waited beside a small table already set up with testing kits. Jonathan finally broke the silence. "Reese," he said, voice low. "Thank you for coming." I managed a nod. My throat felt too tight for words. The test took less than 5 minutes. Cheek swabs, sealed tubes, everything labeled and photographed. The doctor told us the lab would courier results within 48 hours, then left with Jenna. Suddenly, it was just the two of us in a room that felt too big and too quiet. Jonathan poured water for both of us and started talking. No small talk. No excuses, just the truth he had carried for 27 years. He explained that in 1997 he was 24, fresh out of Yale, and dating a girl his family considered completely unacceptable. When she got pregnant, the Hawthornes issued an ultimatum: give the baby up quietly or lose everything. The inheritance, the board seat that was already promised, the deal they were closing to acquire a major European research lab. A public scandal would have tanked the stock and cost hundreds of millions. He fought at first, but his father put him on a plane to London for 18 months to cool off, while the lawyers handled the rest. By the time he came back, the adoption was final, and the trail was buried under layers of trusts and NDAs. Jonathan signed the last page the day I was born, because he truly believed it was the only way to protect me from the media storm that would have followed. He never married, never had other children. Every acquisition, every new drug patent, every late night in the lab had one purpose. "I built Carter Pharmaceuticals only to give it back to you one day," he said, looking straight at me. $28 billion on paper today, and every share is in a trust with your name on it the moment we make this public. The lab called 46 hours later while we were having dinner in the same suite. Jenna handed Jonathan the envelope. He opened it, read the single page, and slid it across the table. Probability of paternity: 99.9998%. He didn't smile or cry, he just reached over and covered my hand with his. "You're my daughter," he said simply. "That's never going to change again." We spent the next several days talking until the early hours. He showed me photographs of the house in Boston where he grew up, told me about the research wing named after his mother who died when he was 12, walked me through the company history he had written with me in mind even when he thought he would never see me. For the first time in my life, someone looked at me like I was the entire reason the world existed. Before I flew back to Louisiana, Jonathan made one thing clear. The company was ready whenever I was. Lawyers, board members, public relations, everything was already in place. He wasn't going to force anything, but the door was wide open and had been waiting since the day I was born. I boarded the plane home with a new passport in my carry-on that still listed Carrington as my last name, but for the first time I didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. The next 4 weeks became the most intense stretch I had ever lived. I kept my little studio in Baton Rouge and my freelance contracts running normally on the outside, but every Thursday night I took the last flight to New York and returned Monday before dawn. No one in Louisiana had any idea where I disappeared to for those long weekends. Dad met me at Teterboro in a different car each time, and we went straight to the Carter Pharmaceuticals headquarters on Park Avenue. The first days were pure overload. Dad walked me floor by floor through a company most people only read about in Forbes. Research labs that looked like something out of a sci-fi movie, manufacturing plants in New Jersey that ran 24/7 regulatory teams who could quote FDA guidelines in their sleep. Jenna scheduled back-to-back sessions with division heads who had been with the company for decades. They explained pipelines worth billions, patent cliffs coming in 2031, and partnerships in Switzerland and Singapore I could barely pronounce. Mornings were strategy and finance. Afternoons belonged to product development and clinical trials. Evenings, Dad and I sat alone in his corner office reviewing numbers until the city lights came on. He never sugarcoated anything. He showed me where the real risks hid, which drugs were make or break, how one failed. Phase 3 could wipe $8 billion off the market cap overnight. Every lesson came with the same quiet line: this will be yours to protect one day. Between meetings, we rebuilt something we had never had in the first place. We ate dinner at tiny Italian places in the village where nobody recognized him. He taught me how he reads a balance sheet the way other people read novels. I showed him the design portfolio I had spent years building in my bedroom in Baton Rouge. He looked at every piece like it was museum-worthy. My wardrobe changed faster than I could keep up. Jenna took me to a discreet tailor on Madison Avenue who measured me for suits that fit like they were painted on. Simple, dark, expensive, without screaming money. Hair got trimmed into a sharp, shoulder-length cut that didn't swing into my face during 12-hour days. Even the way I walked shifted. Heels replaced sneakers, shoulders squared chin level. By the third week, people in the building stopped doing double takes when I stepped out of the private elevator. The board package was prepared in secret. Dad wanted me named co-CEO immediately with a public announcement timed for maximum impact. When a single slide deck accidentally went to the wrong distribution list late one Friday, the internal rumor mill exploded. By Monday morning, the stock had already climbed 8% on no official news. Analysts called it succession optimism. They had no idea how right they were. We spent the last weekend before everything went public at Dad's apartment on the Upper East Side. He opened a bottle of wine from the year I was born, and we sat on the terrace watching boats move up the East River. He told me he had kept that bottle for 27 years, waiting for the day he could share it with me. I finally asked the question I had been carrying since the hotel suite. "Do you want me to take your last name right away?" He thought about it for a long time and then shook his head. "When you're ready, you'll decide what feels right. Hawthorne has been waiting for you a lot longer than Carrington ever deserved." I flew home that Sunday night with a new company laptop in my bag and an amended birth certificate already filed in New York State, listing Jonathan Hawthorne as my father. The papers were sealed until the announcement, but holding them in my hands made everything real in a way nothing else had. By the time I landed in Baton Rouge, I wasn't the same Reese who had packed one suitcase a month earlier. The girl who used to shrink in doorways now walked like she already knew which rooms were going to be hers. Exactly 2 months after I walked out of that house in Baton Rouge, the world found out who I really was. The press conference took place in the main auditorium at Carter Pharmaceuticals headquarters. Every major network had cameras lined up 3 rows deep. Dad had chosen a Tuesday morning in early November, the same week the company released record third-quarter earnings. Timing, he said, was everything. I wore a tailored black suit and stood one step behind him on the stage. Jenna stayed off to the side with the PR team. When Dad stepped to the microphone, the room fell completely silent. He didn't waste time on greetings. 27 years ago, he began voice steady. I made the hardest decision of my life. I allowed my only child to be adopted in secret to protect her from the media storm that would have followed a very public family at the time. Today, I am correcting that decision. He turned and held out his hand. I walked forward and took it. Flashbulbs exploded like lightning. He continued without looking away from me. This is my daughter, Reese Hawthorne. She is the sole heir to Carter Pharmaceuticals and effective immediately my co-CEO. Every share I own transfers to her upon my retirement. There are no other children, no trusts, no complications. She is the future of this company. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions all at once. Dad raised one hand and they quieted again. We will take 3 questions only. Then we're done. The CNBC correspondent went first. Mr. Hawthorne, the stock is already up 12% pre-market. How do you respond to analysts calling this the smoothest succession in pharma history? Dad smiled for the first time all morning. Because it's family. Markets like family. Bloomberg asked about board approval. Dad simply said every director had signed the resolution 2 weeks earlier and filings were already with the SEC. Forbes tried to ask about my background. Dad cut them off. Reese's qualifications will speak for themselves starting today. Thank you. We left the stage to a standing ovation from employees who had been allowed into the back rows. Within minutes, the headline crawled across every screen in America: billionaire Jonathan Hawthorne reveals secret daughter, names her co-CEO of $28 billion Carter Pharmaceuticals. By noon, I was trending worldwide. My old freelance portfolio got 10 million views in 6 hours. The Baton Rouge house I grew up in appeared on Google Street View with news vans parked outside. Cassidy's Instagram went private. Local Louisiana stations dug up yearbook photos and ran them next to shots of me leaving the building in Manhattan. The stock closed that day up 18%, adding nearly $5 billion in market value on the strength of one 15-minute event. Analysts wrote long pieces about how family continuity calmed investor nerves in an industry famous for hostile takeovers and founder drama. They had no idea the real drama was just beginning, but it wasn't going to play out on their screens. Dad and I watched the numbers roll in from his office on the 72nd floor. He poured 2 small glasses of bourbon and handed me one. "Welcome home," he said. We clinked glasses as the sun set over Central Park, turning the whole city gold. That night, I legally changed my name to Reese Hawthorne on every document that mattered. The girl who had been told she was worth $3,000 a month no longer existed. 2 weeks later, the entire Carrington family showed up unannounced on the 72nd floor. Jenna buzzed my office at 10:17 a.m. and simply said, "They're in reception." All 4 of them. Security is holding them. I told her to send them up. They walked in looking exactly like people who had dressed in a hurry for a funeral they weren't sure was theirs. Valerie wore the same pearl necklace she saved for weddings. Gregory kept adjusting a tie he clearly hadn't worn in years. Cassidy clutched an oversized designer bag that suddenly looked cheap against the marble floors. Marlene trailed behind like she still expected someone to offer her coffee. I stayed behind my desk, hands folded, and waited. Dad was in Washington for the day. This one was mine alone. Valerie spoke first, voice cracking on every word. Reese, honey, we saw the news. We're so proud. We just want to talk. Gregory nodded too fast. We never meant for any of this to happen. The money was supposed to help all of us. Cassidy tried a smile that died halfway. You're my sister. We can fix this as a family. Marlene, never one to stay quiet, added. Blood doesn't matter when you've raised someone. I let the silence stretch until it became painful. Then I pressed a button on my phone. A large screen on the wall lit up with a live feed from the East Baton Rouge Parish Clerk of Court website. A bright red banner across the top read, Notice of Foreclosure Sale, 1427 Oak Ridge Drive, scheduled December 18th. Valerie's hand flew to her mouth. Gregory went pale. Cassidy whispered, That's our house. I finally spoke, voice calm and flat. The bank sent the final notice 3 days ago. You stopped making payments 18 months ago when the HELOC rate reset. They warned you repeatedly. You ignored every letter. Gregory started stammering about hospital bills and bad investments. Valerie began crying about how expensive everything had gotten. Cassidy dropped the sister act and asked if I could just talk to someone to pause the sale. Marlene tried guilt. After everything we gave you, this is how you repay us. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. Central Park spread out 72 floors below, bright with November sun. You gave me a roof I paid for with every freelance check once I turned 23, I said without turning around. You gave me leftovers while Cassidy got private colleges. You gave me a locked safe full of secrets and a price tag of $3,000 a month to keep breathing your air. I faced them again. I'm not pausing anything. I'm not buying the house back. I'm not wiring money. I'm not taking calls, texts, or surprise visits ever again. Valerie sank into a chair, sobbing. Gregory looked like he might be sick. Cassidy's eyes filled with real panic for the first time. Marlene opened her mouth to argue, saw my expression, and closed it. I walked to the door and held it open. Security will escort you out. Do not come back to this building. Do not try my phone. You wanted me gone for $3,000. Congratulations. I'm gone. Forever. They filed past me in total silence. Valerie reached out one last time as if to touch my arm. I stepped back. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded exactly like the safe in Gregory's office the day everything began. I returned to my desk, opened the foreclosure file Jenna had prepared, and signed the instruction memo that officially removed any Hawthorne entity from interfering with the scheduled sale. Then I turned to the next item on my calendar, lunch with the head of oncology research. Some debts are paid in full simply by refusing to pay them at all. 3 months later, the consequences arrived exactly as they deserved. The house on Oak Ridge Drive went to auction on a cold Thursday morning in February. A local investor bought it for less than half what Valerie and Gregory still owed. By the end of that same week, movers in unmarked trucks emptied 27 years of memories into a 10 by 20 storage unit on Florida Boulevard. The family photos, the holiday decorations, Cassidy's old dance trophies, everything ended up behind a rolling metal door and a cheap padlock. Valerie and Gregory filed for divorce 31 days after the sale. The papers cited irreconcilable differences, but the real reason sat in separate columns of credit card statements and medical liens that totaled more than either of them could ever pay. Gregory moved into a one-bedroom apartment near the casino where he now dealt blackjack on the night shift. Valerie took a studio above a nail salon and started selling jewelry at weekend flea markets to cover rent. Cassidy never went back to college. The private school in Alabama sent final notices she couldn't answer. Within weeks, she was waiting tables at a 24-hour diner off I-10, wearing the same black apron and forced smile 6 nights a week. Tips barely covered gas, and the phone bill she still paid in her own name. Marlene lost her social circle faster than anyone expected. Bridge club friends stopped returning calls once the country club gossip spread. Invitations dried up. The women who once asked her opinion on everything suddenly discovered they had previous engagements every single Tuesday. She spent most afternoons alone in a condo that felt bigger and quieter every day. I heard none of this from them directly. Jenna's team kept a simple monitoring file: public records, social media changes, credit header updates. Once a month, a single-page summary landed on my desk. I read it, signed the cover sheet, and filed it away. I never replied to the random numbers that still tried my phone, never opened the envelopes forwarded from Louisiana, never second-guessed the silence I had chosen. Some people asked whether I felt guilty watching everything collapse. The truth is, I felt nothing at all where they were concerned. Not hatred, not satisfaction, just the clean absence that comes when a door finally closes for good. Dad and I kept building. Carter Pharmaceuticals crossed $35 billion in market value before spring. We broke ground on a pediatric research center in Boston that will carry both our names. My apartment on the Upper East Side has a terrace where I drink coffee every morning and watch the same city that once felt impossible now belong to me in ways I never imagined. Sometimes the greatest victory is not revenge. It is walking away and never once looking back. If you stayed with me until the very last word, thank you. Thank you for listening to the end. This story is finished, but I would love to know what it made you feel, what it made you think about your own life, your own family, your own worth. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Every single one matters to me. And if this journey touched you even a little, share it with someone who needs to hear that blood doesn't decide your value, and that leaving can sometimes be the most powerful way to arrive. See you in the next story.